WFJA 105.5, Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines.
It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
So good evening, guys. I'm Macon.
I'm Lewis.
And we are the Recovery Boys. We want to thank everybody for listening, either listening tonight on our live feed or sometime this week during the podcast. Lewis, we were talking at dinner, and we were talking about the first 5 minutes of the show. We need to do a little bit of house cleaning here, and we do want people to reach out to us. If they want to call us during the show, we would love to have some interaction with the listeners. And so we're going to give you some information before we get into the show tonight. And
what a concept.
Yeah. We're going to break up the show a little bit from format-wise. We're going to have two guests on tonight as opposed to one. And we'll talk about that. But let's start out with just some of the basics of running the radio talk show, which is if you want to call us, the phone number here at the studio is 866-465-3110.
Let me repeat that for the listeners. Those of you that did not get a pen until now, that number is 866-465-3110. And we would like to hear from you.
We would. And if you prefer to reach out to us through the internet, go to therecoveryboys.com. Therecoveryboys.com. There's a way for you to reach out to us via email. If we don't get to the question and conversation that your question elicits from us tonight, we'll do it next week. We will always be responsive to our listeners. And so there we actually started the show.
Well, there's one other thing I want to add, though. If you wanted to listen to us online, just go to WFJA 105.5 FM's website. And you can click on. It's very easy to do. Even I did it.
And we also we just to be a little bit redundant, I suppose, we added a click link on our website. So there is actually a tab on the Recovery Boys where it says Listen Live. And if you do that while we're on the air, it'll take you straight to that feed that Lewis just talked about. So as I said earlier, first off, how you doing, Lewis?
I'm doing great.
Good. I enjoyed dinner. Always thankful for my wife Taylor coming with us and being part of our studio audience, as it were. So yeah, we're looking forward to the show tonight. I did want to go back over and make sure that we're always on point where the goals of the show are to provide information about addiction, alcoholism, and specifically recovery. It's important for us that we become a resource, and one of the things that you'll see on the website, there is a treatment tab where we have some resources for people with insurance, with no insurance. We don't, our goal would be for everybody who needs treatment to get it, irregardless of how much money they got, how much money they don't have, whether they're working, not working, married, not married. If you have an addiction or if you have mental illness, all the things that affect this disease, we would like to become a resource for you so you can try and get that help.
Well, actually, it's interesting you should bring that up, Macon, because I was reading today on the National Institute of Health's website where roughly 10% of the population is experiencing some form of addiction at any one point in time, and less than 10% of those people actually get help, which is sad considering all the resources that are out there.
Well, the thing that seems to be difficult for people is information. We hear it all the time. We're in the business. We're open with we live in recovery. We're open about that. So we do invite people to stop us on the side of the road, or our friends or whatever, or pass our name and our phone number over to other people. It always astounds me. The first question is, what do I do? I mean, it's almost like there is zero information. The amount of the lack of education in this disease really prohibits a lot of treatment.
Well, you know, last week when Jan was on, it was which, by the way, what a phenomenal guest we had on last week. If you get a chance, you want to go back one show and listen, because Jan's story was incredibly compelling. I listened to it again last night, and the things that she went through, one of the things she pointed out was you don't know when you're in the throes of this what to do. You don't know how to act. You don't know who to go to, because there's so many options.
Yeah, you know, she called me. We talked the next day, and, you know, she said, I hope I was okay. I said, you were perfect. I said, you were honest, which is what people, you know, that's what they want to hear. But, you know, it's funny. I thought about it. You know, people who have been affected by the disease of alcoholism and addiction, we experience the highs and the lows. The highs and the lows, we always have attention. It's that in-between time that's so difficult. And she'll head into that now. She has to get back. You know, the anniversary of the death of her Jordy is come and gone. She has another daughter in trouble, and so she's right back in the battle. And that's the tough part is maintaining some perspective. And how do you begin to approach a quality of life with these issues? And there's a lot of families that have the same problems.
Well, that's what really jumped out at me after listening to it again last night, that it is absolutely, and I had heard this ad nauseum for years, but it is absolutely a family disease.
Yeah, it is for a fact.
In fact, it's somewhat easier on the addict than it is on the family.
The addict does get the benefit of the drug or the alcohol.
Yes.
And when I say benefit, I'm not being facetious. I mean, you know, most of us that do it because we enjoy it, not because we're trying to hide from something, at least in my case. But one of the things that we're going to do tonight, we're going to introduce you to somebody that's in early recovery. And I thought, you know, what we'll do is we will have this particular person on as a guest each week to introduce him to our listeners, but also to keep up with the week-to-week the trip, you know, the journey of somebody that's in early recovery. So maybe, you know, people can hear the struggles, you know, the things that are difficult. And this is a young boy, young man. I've known him for a little while. He's a great kid, and he's fighting that battle. And so when I was in treatment, Lewis, one of the things that I really did enjoy. I mean, one of the things I looked forward to when I was in treatment was group discussion. And at the start of group discussion, the group leader we would do what they call in treatment check-in. That's when you go around and ask everybody, how you doing, what's on your mind. And so that's what we want to create with Chris. Chris is our young early recovery first guest tonight. And we'll bring him on here in a second. But Lewis, the second guest is somebody that you found for us tonight. I'll let you just introduce him to our listeners. Yeah,
it's also a young man. I mean, relatively speaking, right, Macon?
Yes.
Who's about half my age, but he's a phenomenal recovery guy. He could be one of us, but he's not. And his story is very compelling, and he runs a remarkable program in Raleigh that I think his story is worth telling, and he has some different insights from what you and I do because we are so much older than he is. And he kind of bonds with his clientele, and I'll let him explain all that, but and we'll get into that afterwards. But okay.
Well, good. Well, look. I think we have Chris on the phone. Chris, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good, buddy. I'm good. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, buddy. No problem. You know, as we discussed earlier in today, what we really want to do is introduce you to our listeners and describe the process of recovery from somebody's perspective that's actually going through it. And, you know, I'm just going to let you briefly introduce yourself to our listeners, you know, and give us some facts. And, you know, when you started using, you know, just bring us up to speed so we can kind of keep up with you. It's just like when we're in group, we're asking you to check in with us. Tell us what kind of day you had.
I'll start off today. It was pretty normal, I'd have to say. I got up, I ate some breakfast, and I went to work, and and that was about it. And this afternoon I went to the gym, but a little bit of background. I started drinking and using drugs when I was very young. I was probably about 12 or 13 years old, and it wasn't because I felt like I didn't fit in or I had issues when I was a kid or anything like that. I just did it because it was what other people was doing, and like you said a few minutes ago, it did something for me. I enjoyed the way it made me feel, and I really didn't know what I was getting into, and it's definitely caused me a lot of pain and heartache, and a lot of pain and heartache for my family as well.
Yeah. Well, Chris, one of the things I wanted to ask you were, and, share what you want to share. You can be as honest as you want to be. I mean, be comfortable telling us what you're telling us, but explain to the listeners some of the consequences that you've suffered because of your disease.
Well, when I was 15 years old, when I was 14, I was lucky enough, I got put on probation, and by the time I was 15, I was in my first treatment center. Since then, I've been to 11. I've been to prison twice, and I've been to jail numerous times, all because of my addiction. And what I found out is when I'm not drinking, when I'm not using, I don't have to go to any of those places. I have 2 children, and I really don't have a relationship with them due to the fact that I drank and used drugs, and really it was all fun and games at first, and then it becomes something like I had to have at all costs, and I was pretty much willing to go through anything and hurt whoever I had to, and I really didn't want to. Like, there was those mornings I'd get up and know I was going to have to do something that day I really didn't want to do, just so I could feel normal, and that's no way to live, and I definitely didn't enjoy it. But then again, it goes back to the thing you said at the beginning of the show. Like, it did something to me. It made me feel exactly the way I wanted to feel, and I wanted to feel that way all the time. I wanted to feel good, and that's what I chose until it become a point I didn't have a choice.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time, but there's a point, I think, in every person in active addiction where you quit using because you want to and you start using because you have to.
Definitely.
That's what you describe, and then you do discover the power of the disease because you do things. You and I have had conversations. I stole drugs from my mother while she was dying. Who does that? Who does that?
Yeah.
Especially to a woman who loved me like, you cannot have any greater love than my mom had for all of her boys. And so, but that was one of the things that I don't know that I get comfort from it, but it certainly makes sense to me, is that was the disease, that wasn't me. And you and I have had that conversation. One of the things I would like for you to tell listeners is how much sobriety do you have under your belt right now?
I'm coming up on 2 months.
That's awesome.
And and I'd say early recovery is definitely not easy. Like, I hear people talking about this pink cloud deal, and I'd say some moments are great, then others are terrifying. Like, I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. I feel empty. And then there's times I feel great, energetic, I'm happy, and I just feel like I'm where I'm at, where I'm supposed to be at that moment. And it's just, it's kind of like, walking into the unknown. You just, like, I have no idea, like, what to expect. I've been drinking for so long, like, I don't know how to live a normal life, per se.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to, one of the things that all the guys in early recovery is we try and introduce them to what is normal, because we've lived in such an abnormal environment that we create ourselves. We create that environment, but the abnormal becomes normal for us. So obviously, if we're going to be successful in recovery, we have to flip that, and we have to go back and we have to learn, quite honestly, what is normal. Paying bills on time, saving money, helping people, all the things that we didn't do when we were using are things. Those are the building blocks of normal. I think that we all in early recovery, and I know that I've had plenty of conversations with you, and I know that those are some of the things. And we're only going to keep you for a few minutes because we want to have you on every week, just so our listeners can kind of keep up with your progress. But one of the things I would like for you to articulate, if you don't mind, is what are your hopes? What are the hopes for the future? We work so hard on a day at a time. We do all the work that we're supposed to do, but it's hard not to allow yourself to look into the future sometimes, because I think that some of those normal things are what we want. And so I'd like, maybe we talk about that a little bit with you as we go forward.
Okay. I'd say some of my hopes for the future, quite a few of them are already coming true so early. So I try not to set, high expectations. I try to, just do what's right in front of me. But I've been fortunate enough to, I've been able to get a pretty good job. I have a place to live. I have a vehicle, and I'd say some of my hopes and some goals I'd like to accomplish is to being able to build a relationship with my kids and being in their life, long-term recovery, and like that paying bills thing. Like I got a seatbelt ticket and I get to pay it tomorrow. Like whereas before I wouldn't have been able to pay it because all my money would have went to drugs and drinking. So
yeah. Well, those are wonderful things to hear. And Lewis, you got something you want to ask him?
Yeah, Chris, I don't think you clarified it, but how old are you now?
I'm 25 years old.
Okay. Well, I just want to commend you. I've often said this. I do not understand how a young man your age even decides to get into recovery, other than the consequences you put yourself into. But I was about your age when I started drinking, and it just elevated. And I was on a 38-year bender. So I was a lot older. I was twice your age when I decided to get sober. So I commend you. Can you kind of elaborate on some of the things that your parents had to go through?
I'd say my mother, having to. I'd say one of the hardest things was the first time I got sentenced to prison. Looking back at her and her having to watch her watching me get drug off to jail, knowing that I'd be locked up for the next year or so, and having to bail me out. Like I remember one time I called my mom. I was sleeping, and I woke up. She had her hand on my chest, and I asked her what she was doing, and she said that she was making sure I was breathing. And sorts of things like that, like taking her money and stuff like. And it just, the list goes on and on, like the stuff I put them through, and not even wanting to do it. Like I didn't want to do these things, but it was like I definitely had no choice. So I definitely put them through, and like all the money she spent getting me out of jail and treatment centers and sending me money while I was in there, stuff like that. And I know she worried about me a whole lot, and she still does. So.
Yeah. Well, listen, Chris, thanks for checking in with us. We'll start each show each week with maybe a little less of a check-in, but we just want to keep up with you, and we wish you great success, and I look forward to catching up with you later on this week. All right?
All right. Thanks, Macon.
Thanks, buddy.
Louis. Y'all have a good
Chris.
night.
See you, buddy.
Bye.
Well, he's a
wow.
He's a nice kid, and I've got both my fingers, all the fingers I got to cross, I keep cross, because he's got a couple of young kids that he has no relationship with. I marvel at people that young that can pull it together. Well, let's face it, the addicts and the alcoholics are a lot younger than they were when we were growing up.
Oh, yes.
I mean, the disease has spread. Social media plays a part in it. There's a lot of different aspects, but I think that anybody, you can ask Taylor, she'll tell you, you see them in the detox. all over the country, they're younger and younger and younger.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So I think we'll have our second guest on the phone here in a second.
Okay. I do want to talk about the fact that he was interesting. I don't know if you noticed, he said he was lucky enough to be put on probation, which I think is very telling. I mean, most people go, probation? I don't want to be on probation. Well, I guess he meant in lieu of prison.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. We've had some serious conversations, and right now I think that he feels lucky that he's still alive. I mean, he could have put himself, forget the situations that you get in when you're trying to acquire drugs. This day and time, he could have gotten a bad load of fentanyl in one of those when he was shooting his heroin, and your heart just stops.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that if we've done nothing else as at least as an industry, we have demonstrated with the media and everybody else that you can die from this immediately, instantly.
Well, and Jan's conversation last week to me was very telling in that the stakes are so much higher than when you and I were coming up.
No question about it.
People die instantaneously, whereas it took them at least a period of time over which they had to use for it to happen.
Yeah.
It's a total game changer now.
Well, one of the things we want to make sure is we're going to pay due respect to the disease, but we also want to make sure that we spend as much time as we can talking about recovery, because what we want people, we don't want to always highlight the people who didn't make it. We certainly want to talk about the ones who, and that's the reason I wanted to get Chris in. He's making it right now, and we're going to hopefully chart that course with him. But we really do want to talk to these folks, like our next guest, about recovery and about the work that he's doing in his business, to maybe educate the people that are listening to us tonight that if you've got a child the age of I think we call it academically oriented recovery program. I'm interested in listening to what Tripp's got to say. So why don't you introduce him to the listeners?
Yeah, Tripp, are you on the phone?
I'm on the phone.
Great. By the way, this is Tripp Johnson. Tripp is the CEO of Greenhill Recovery out of Raleigh. And rather than me going into detail as to what he does, it was very, I think, timely that we had Chris on, because Chris is right in Tripp's sweet spot as far as he treats.
Yep.
So, Tripp, if you don't mind, by the way, and Tripp is a dear friend of mine. He's a lot younger than me, that he enjoys telling people about that. But he also is very astute in the field of recovery, is very passionate about helping young men get the help they need at the appropriate time. So, Tripp, if you don't mind, kind of tell everybody, give everybody a brief overview of what Greenhill is about, and I'll circle back around to you specifically.
Sure. I'll give a quick overview of Greenhill, and then a little bit about how kind of we got started, how I, really got interested in creating a program like Greenhill, and a little bit of my kind of personal background. But I do think that, what I always say is that we're a clinically driven transitional living program for emerging adults in early recovery. So just to unpack that statement a little bit, it's transitional living, meaning that we are, not a halfway house and not just a clinical service, but really a wraparound program for emerging adults, being kind of that 18 to 26 year old range. And our big goal is, helping young men launch back into real life, whether that's going to be higher education, completing high school, or getting their career started. And as far as I go, I got really interested in this because I got lucky. I mean, my really 16 to 25 year old time frame was characterized with a lot of bad decisions. And I had a family that was always there for me and potentially enabled some of my behavior. But I got really into yoga and meditation when I got back from deployment to Afghanistan. And that's when I really started to take a look at my life and, the decisions I was making. And fast forward a few years, and the opportunity kind of came up to help start a program. The year prior, I had lost a few friends to overdoses, and I also had a few friends that went to transitional living programs after going to treatment, and they were doing incredibly well. So just like you were talking about before I got on, I think it's really important to highlight, that recovery is within people's reach, and really helping find the right program and the right supports, can make that a reality. So my friends that ended up going to treatment and then transitional living programs, the one common thread that I heard from them was that they were a little bit behind their trajectory before they went into treatment. And so we kind of set out to create a program that really addressed some of those other elements of life beyond just sobriety, but really building a life of purpose and helping people find their passion and really uncover what makes them, tick, that are, going to be much better substitutes for the, drugs and alcohol. So that's the elevator pitch, I guess.
Tripp, you and I talk about this age group, and there's several terms that have been used to define them. Failure to launch is one, and you tend to use the term emerging adult. Can you kind of speak on what happens to adolescents when they get involved in this, the lifestyle, and what it does to their development?
Sure. So I'll always say that I am not a clinician. I, try and speak as accurately as possible, but anyone who's listening, just know that there's a disclaimer there. But, I mean, this age group, especially, when we're working with adolescents that get involved with, drugs and alcohol at an early age, it just really stunts their development from a neurological perspective and from a social learning perspective. So they're not developing the healthy habits and healthy coping mechanisms, and not going through some of the same trials and tribulations and the need to create like a strong identity and like understand themselves that their peers who are not turning to drugs and alcohol, may be going through, because they're using, intoxicants as a way to escape from some of that difficult developmental work. So I don't know if I answered the question there, but it certainly, it really just changes the course of their lives a lot of times.
We talked about the emerging adult situation. Speak a little bit about when you see these kids, where are they if you could chronologically place them, where are they in most cases?
Well, I think we work with a lot of young men who are 21, 22 years old, but for, even my generation being, 10 or 15 years older than them, and certainly like my parents' generation, developmentally it seems like they're 14 or 15 years old. They probably haven't learned a lot of the necessary life skills that at one point were just taken for granted. Simple stuff. I say simple, but maybe they didn't learn it at home, or they didn't learn it when they tried to leave the home. But taking care of themselves, like really understanding how to, grocery shop, how to, use a calendar and make appointments, and, how to do their own laundry, that kind of thing. So those are all things that, unfortunately, for a lot of guys, they have to address when they're a little bit older, 21, 22, even older sometimes.
What are these kids typically into by the time they get to you?
So it really depends. I mean, I would say, especially for the, opioids have certainly, the awareness around opioids has certainly, I think, been very welcome to the community, because, again, as you all were saying before I got on, the chances of something fatal, a fatal accident happening, have increased dramatically from even 10 years ago with fentanyl. But we're seeing a lot of the younger guys who, it is definitely like a polysubstance use disorder, meaning it's not just alcohol, it's not just marijuana. It's not just benzos. We're seeing a lot. Those three are the really prevalent for the kind of, when we talk about that failure to launch or emerging adult, a lot of times those are the three we're seeing. Whereas even, like I'm going to say that I'm seeing that a lot with 18 to 22, 23-year-olds, and even from the 23 to 27, that heroin and prescription painkillers, being opiates, were even more prevalent. So I don't know if that's an actual shift, but that's my anecdotal experience.
Well, and you guys have been open now for, by the way, you guys opened, I think you and I opened about the same time, I believe, maybe a little bit later than us. Wellwyn?
I think just a few months later than Wellwyn opened. So we've been around for 24 months now.
Okay.
Or 26 months.
In that span, you've seen changes, I'm sure, right?
I mean, certainly. And it's always hard for me to track if the changes in the population or who's coming to seek our services. But, we are certainly doing more. I know at least when we set out with the kind of the vision of Greenhill, that we thought it was going to be maybe more of a population. Like I thought I was going to be working with, more guys that shared similar experiences to mine. Hard partying, really driven to do well in certain aspects of life, but, self-destructive behaviors. And what we're seeing, more and more of it with the younger guys is just really haven't figured out what they want to do, who they want to be. And there's a kind of a lack of purpose a lot of times that, reinforces the, drinking and drug use.
So we talk about, in our business, the term co-occurring disorder comes up quite frequently. Do you have anyone who comes in that's strictly drugs or alcohol?
Very rarely would we ever classify someone as just a substance use disorder. I would say over 90% have at least a diagnosis of generalized anxiety, depression. We're also seeing a good number of young men with some pretty significant trauma histories. And then, of course, like they're on the more serious kind of co-occurring side. This is also, we're often dealing with young men after they've had a somewhat serious mental health diagnosis. This is when, typically guys are coming away with, bipolar diagnosis, some sort of axis 2 diagnosis, such as borderline personality disorder. And also, we have seen a number of folks who've had schizoaffective disorders. Sometimes it's hard to tease out because of the substance use, whether it's going to be someone with a schizophrenia diagnosis or whether, some of the drug use led to a psychotic episode.
Okay.
Tripp, I did have this, Bacon. I have a question. I was just wondering, I want to talk about maybe the process of entering Greenhill. You deal with, typically you deal with the parents. Do you ever actually have a young man reach out to you, or is it generally, do you hear from the parents?
So I would say it's 90% the parents. We have, for the past 2 years, only served young men that were living in our transitional living, so living in apartments with us. But now, as we've opened a community outpatient program, we are having, young men reach out a little bit more. But I would say a lot of times the young men we're working with are in primary treatment, meaning, they're in traditional rehab or in some sort of wilderness therapy. So a lot of times they actually couldn't reach out. But I think that may also be indicative of kind of where they are at this point in their life, that a lot of times the parents are driving these decisions and really making those calls.
Yeah, and so this would be, for some of these kids, this would be a step from traditional treatment into a more detailed program? Is that what you guys do?
So what we do is we're kind of a bridge from the simple way to think of it is that we're a bridge from rehab to independent living. And that while really good treatment at an inpatient program may provide, all the psychoeducation they need, that there's a whole other piece that involves, learning how to build a new peer group and, dealing with some of those stressors in life, whether it's school or work related, while still living in a supportive environment. So almost everyone who's in our program, who's in the transitional living at least, has been to treatment before coming to us. And then on the outpatient side, it's a little bit different, but similar, kind of philosophy on how we're approaching them, that there's a lot more than just the psychoeducation piece.
Yeah, we talk, Lewis and I talk all the time, and my wife, who's in the business, we talk all the time about aftercare, and it sounds like what you're an extension, or at least you're maybe the first step of an aftercare program, because it is incredibly important that, once they get treatment, that there's some extension of treatment. It sounds to me like maybe that's some of what you offer, certainly a much more focused than, just getting somebody in a sober living facility and helping them find a job. But that aftercare is so important. I was wondering, what kind of, do you keep up with the guys that come through your program after they leave? Have you noticed good success with the guys who come through your program?
It's a really good question. We just finished our Joint Commission accreditation, so with a lot of that, we will be capturing more data on long-term outcomes measures, which is really important to us to make sure that people are not just doing well when they're with us, but are, continuing to see success. So I would hate to speak, about percentages of numbers who are either maintaining sobriety or just having a high quality of life. But I would say that I think we've done a lot of meaningful work, and that as an organization, that's one of the areas that we can improve, is collecting some of that data. But it's really important for us, for the guys who go through our programs. So our programs typically, the average length of stay with us is 9 months. We usually encourage parents to be, planning on 9 to 12 months, but sometimes 6 months with us is great. And then we also have an alumni program, so they're continuing to stay involved if they're in the local community. That's a huge piece of it for us, is just maintaining engagement and not letting them, continuing to provide the supports and that kind of tapering off over time instead of there's an abrupt end.
Yeah, well, I was wondering, it sounds like maybe when you first take them in, you have a little bit more of a willing client than some of the traditional treatment centers where you may have somebody still bucking that, I don't want to get help. Sounds like a lot of the guys that come through your system are ready for the help that they need to receive. But do you notice any resistance at the very start when you start with these kids?
Well, we always think that there's a little bit of a honeymoon phase with us. So the first month for us is actually one where a lot of times these guys have already been in treatment, so they have more freedom with us than they had before. So they like us at first, but then after 2 or 3 months, we always say that around the 90-day mark with us, that's when we start, introducing the idea of, like, you need to start working or going to school. Well, we've been working on that plan since they get there. Now it's time to go execute it. So that always brings up a lot of, some of the underlying issues. If it's anxiety, depression, we see a lot of social anxiety, just people not generally knowing how to interact as well in face-to-face situations. So around the 90-day mark is a lot of times when we start getting a lot of pushback from the young men that we're serving. They either say they're fine, they've got this thing licked, they don't need any more help, and then they're, ready for more autonomy themselves. So generally, I think that the, 90 to 180-day mark for us is where we start to do a lot of the deep work. And if we can get through that, then we start seeing really like a lot more success.
Yeah, a lot more growth. Well, it would be interesting how do you manage the expectations of the parents? Because it would seem, I would imagine, we talked about it last week, that it's a family disease, and so you're not only taking on these clients, but you're also taking on the parents. How do you communicate with them as the program's going through?
Well, first of all, communicate a lot. It's a huge piece. I mean, typically the parents are, paying for treatment.
Right.
So really having their buy-in from the beginning is really important. We offer anyone who's in our program, the expectation is that they're doing at least one family session a week with a family therapist, but then also they're going to be getting updates, weekly, and they have a lot of access to our staff, both on the clinical side as well as kind of just the programming side. So all the experiential activities they're doing, the guys working at the house. But for us, working with, like you said, that addiction is a family disease. A lot of the work we have to do with families and with the young men we're serving is helping them build a consensus about what a quality life looks like. Because whatever was going on before wasn't working, and then, sometimes the parents have expectations for their kids that maybe the kids don't share, and then vice versa. So a lot of the work we do is making sure that the parents, we try and build a consensus about what the treatment plan looks like, and the treatment plan includes their academic or career goals. And really making sure that we communicate expectations and timelines as effectively as possible, so that we're not talking to a parent who says, my son's been great, I came to visit, he's been there 3 months, it seems like he's ready to go. So really just communicating kind of the success rates you see when someone's maintained a year of sobriety, and let's just not rush this. Let's really try and get it right this time, so you don't end up back here, in another program 6 months or a year from now.
Yeah, you mentioned, it's interesting because you mentioned 9 months. Now, I'm familiar with your protocols, and that doesn't seem long term to me. But what kind of reaction do you get from parents when you tell them to expect your child to be with you for 9 months?
It's really mixed. We have, even on like the messaging front, because this is a part of the admissions, and it is, at the end of the day, you have to plan and budget for these things as a family and as a program. Some parents are over the moon. We actually have some people who are with us. We've got a couple guys with us who've been over 14 months now. Typically at the year mark, they would at least transition into our alumni house. So a lot of families they've done their research, and they understand that, the chances for success and a good outcome really increase once you get that year of sobriety under your belt. Other ones are appalled. They can't believe, they heard rehab was 30 days, then they went to rehab, and now they're telling them you need another year of treatment. And so those are the difficult cases for us as a program, because it always puts us in a position where we're advocating for the family to, pay us for treatment, also knowing that it's in their son's best interest.
Why do you think that you're seeing such a surge in this age group, particularly males?
Oh, man. I think a lot of people are pointing to kind of that iGen, being the kids who grew up with iPhones and pads and whatnot. And I definitely think that can play a factor. I think that a lot of the development, the normal development of yesteryear, involved face-to-face activities, going out, playing, and a lot of our digital culture, whether it's social media, there are feedback loops for them to get the algorithms are a lot smarter than we are, so they get immediate rewards, and they have their own feedback system on social media platforms, and even with video games, we see a lot of guys who have really spent too much time playing video games, and that again goes into this. I think what it does a lot of times, it gives them basically a pseudo flow state. So you might be in a flow state when you're skiing or competing athletically, but I think a lot of these video games and social media get people kind of out of their normal thinking, and it's something that they kind of latch onto, but it's not reality. And then when you're used to being able to sit down and figure out a video game and you've got to go figure out real life, it's daunting.
It does desensitize them, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm always hesitant to draw my own my anecdotes, but I definitely think that this age group is not socializing in the same way. The research is out there that they're, at least now, a lot are engaging less in some of the reckless behavior, but also less in what we consider the traditional socializing.
Well, you've kind of touched on it, but I had a question here that I wanted to ask concerning gaming and all the other process addictions like, porn, sex, gambling. How much of that are you seeing?
It's a good question. I certainly wouldn't say that a program like ours, if someone were really coming in with what someone might want to diagnose as like a gaming addiction, that's probably not an appropriate program for us. And we view it, especially just while they're with us, is, there's also a huge difference between a group of guys playing video games together in the same room and someone isolating in their bedroom playing on their computer with the lights off. So we look at it as a kind of nuanced approach. But as far as gambling, a lot of these behaviors pop up in early recovery as well. So you start kind of playing whack-a-mole with some of these disorders, and that's why it's really important when you mentioned the co-occurring. It's really important to treat these kind of simultaneously so you don't feel like you're playing whack-a-mole. You get the substance use under control, and all of a sudden it's an eating disorder or a gaming addiction that you're dealing with.
Well, I know your program fairly well because you've introduced me to it, and I think it's a phenomenal program. But you mentioned early on about you were into yoga, and can you talk a little bit about? I know that Greenhill is much more than a few groups a week, and an individual session or two. Can you kind of talk about the experiential components that you guys put them through?
Sure. So we always break it down into, we say that there are three main kind of components of our program. The clinical work being, you come in and in the beginning you're doing about 14 hours of clinical work a week, and that eventually tapers down to 3 or 4. And then the other big component we always talk about is the academic and career focus. Again, a lot of these young men have, gone to college and not succeeded the first time, or maybe, never completed high school before their substance use became an issue. So we've developed a curriculum to help them get back into school, whether that's completing high school, getting back into college, or starting careers. So everything from resume building to interview prep. But then the resident life component, which you were talking about with the experiential piece, we know that young men need to find a way to have fun to maintain sobriety. Otherwise, they're just going to go back to what they know, air quotes, works for them to have fun. So that health and wellness component, we have yoga classes 3 times a week. They're going to the gym. We've got someone facilitating them going to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. They're going, Raleigh is a city, but we have great access, getting outside some, whether it's Umstead State Park, whether it's going down to the beach, going to the mountains. So really getting outside and getting active is a huge component of that. Maybe connecting back to something that they really enjoyed, or, starting a new habit or hobby. So everything, sometimes it's as simple as going go-karting. Other times it's going, snowboarding or to the beach for a couple of days. But really trying to get them doing what we consider age-appropriate fun and activities that they'll be able to do themselves when they, leave a structured setting.
Can you, we've got about 5 more minutes, Tripp. I'd like for you to kind of share with everybody some of the successes you've had, some of the young men. You don't need to name them by name, but I know you're very proud of the guys that have come to your program and what they've done. Can you kind of share some of the successes with everyone?
Sure. It's always interesting because success looks different for every individual. And one of the things that I'm proud of is, while we serve a specific population, we also, they're varied in that. So one of the first guys that comes to mind was actually one of the guys probably only stayed with us 6 months. And he went to treatment before. We had a great handoff from his previous treatment provider. He was in med school, and that was not a good fit for him. And very smart guy, really charismatic, but really didn't know what he wanted to do. So for us, it meant we had to spend a lot of time helping him, network in the area and find a job that was going to be fulfilling, because someone who leaves med school isn't, necessarily going to find fulfillment, just working at Starbucks and, holding down a job. So one of the things I was really proud of was some of our staff members, reached out into their network and ended up getting him, like a financial analyst job in Research Triangle Park. And he's been doing phenomenally well, comes back to the house every Sunday night for dinners. And it's just awesome to have that kind of reinforcing the message that we're sending that, not only is recovery possible, but having a great life is possible. And then some of the other guys, we've had a couple guys last semester either graduate from NC State or transition out of Greenhill as they, continue and go on to finish at NC State and then get their first jobs. So that's been, really cool to seeing people launch into their careers. We also have a young man who, finished high school with us and is now, working in this field. He's interning and with another program in Raleigh. And it's just really cool to see people interested in working and giving back in this field. So I always think that's cool to show someone completing high school and doing really well. Someone who completed college now has, an engineering job, and then someone who had already finished their bachelor's degree, but then we were able to help them find kind of fulfilling work. So those are the 3 I would highlight. And this is the last question, I think we've got to wrap it up, but I'm interested because you mentioned your military background. What was it like coming from a very regimented military background to this? I mean, this is organized chaos in a lot of cases. Well, I always tell people also, like when they ask how West Point was, I say I didn't have the normal experience. So I was partying a lot at that time, and I was certainly used to a lot of routine still. So I think one of the big adjustments for me was in working with these young men and helping create a program that really serves them, is understanding how different my experience has been from theirs. I might have been, partying until 4 a.m, but I was still getting up to go to PT at 5. And that's just not, what we're working with for the most part. But there certainly, that's what I wanted to use my experience was to also help work with guys who I would be able to connect with or help build a program where they might be able to connect with someone who, felt like on the surface things looked like they were going pretty well, but I had a lot of my own work to do. So really kind of destigmatizing the fact that, we all need help, and getting that help can really set you up for a fulfilling life.
So, in closing, Tripp, would you please give us and give our listeners, both of them,
More than that, Tripp. Don't let him.
an idea as
Hey,
how
Gloria.
yeah, hey Gloria, thank you. An idea as to how they can get in touch with you, your website, and all that good stuff.
Sure. So our new website will be up, but one's up right now, www.greenhillrecovery.com. And then the best way to contact us via email would just be info@greenhillrecovery.com. And our main line number is 984-204-1106.
You don't call yourself very often, do you?
I
can't
don't.
remember my
I don't
number
call
either,
the
Tripp.
main line.
Yeah.
I'm not even that old.
Well,
Hey, you said it earlier.
I know. Listen, I want to thank you for coming on like this. It means a great deal to me. If you can't tell, I'm a big Tripp fan, and I think the work you've done and the job you're doing is phenomenal, and I'm just glad that we connected. So again, thank you very much, and now you're a friend of Macon's.
Yeah, thank you, Tripp. I look forward to meeting you in person one
Macon,
day.
absolutely. We'll have to do that soon. And Lewis, as always, thanks for all your mentorship, and we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Tripp.
So that was interesting, Lewis. We ran out of time. I wanted to ask him, and maybe I can just ask you, is that something insurance covers? Is that a private pay situation? Is that something that would be considered a high-end treatment option for parents, or are there scholarship? I mean, when it's all said and done, it's usually we have to pay attention to cost. Do you have any idea about that?
I don't know the specifics, but I can tell you this. Tripp, and one of the reasons that Tripp and I have bonded, he literally is old enough to be my son, which is sad. He probably could be my grandson if you want to get technical about it. I'm from North Carolina. You read between the lines on that one. But one of the reasons that he and I have gotten along so well is our approaches are very similar. We do not turn anyone away.
Right.
So if a parent or a child or a young man were to come to him, I know that if he could not, for whatever reason, work out the numbers to bring him in, and insurance does play a part in this, but money is always an issue, right?
It is.
But Tripp will be able to find the proper place for the individual, and he will not rest until it's done.
Yeah, and that's so important because, just like our first guest, he's out there. He has to earn his living. Any kind of aftercare treatment program is going to probably be something he wouldn't even consider because he just considers it out of his reach. And, one of the things that we want to do is educate the public that, listen, don't be afraid to ask for help. You know what? I mean, there's usually a way. If you want help bad enough, there's a way for us to help everybody in the industry. Most people that work in the recovery industry don't do it for money. I can promise you that. They do it because they get a sense of accomplishment and because they're trying to help people because somebody's probably helped them. But
well, I'll go even further than that. I met with the father of a 43-year-old attorney today, whose son I helped get into treatment, and he thanked me for what I did. And I said, well, I got to tell you something. This is not from an altruistic standpoint. He's keeping me sober. And you know what I'm talking about, Macon. I do this for a very selfish reason. It keeps me grounded, and it keeps me in the game. So that's why we do it. So anyway, I just wanted to thank everyone for listening today. The number again is 866-465-3110. We will be here again next week. The website, therecoveryboys.com, if you want to listen and actually see us, which should be a real treat for a lot of you.
And that's perfect. And next week's guest, I'll confirm it at the end of this week. It looks like we'll maybe have the ex-governor, Pat McCrory, would be our guest next week to talk about state resources. So we thank everybody for listening tonight. Lewis, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Taylor, thanks for coming with me and keeping me awake and on point. And we thank everybody for listening. We'll see you next week.
Good night.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys on WFJA. Visit the Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.